CN is blessed to be part of the team here in Halifax. In most cities that we go, the railroad came first, especially in Western Canada, and eventually, the cities grew around the railroad. Halifax is the reverse. Halifax is really the port railroad that has a long, long history, and CN came in after. But even though we came in after, our role here is extremely critical because we would like to see Halifax, just like Hamburg, becoming a port for the hinterland. And that's really one of my key messages here today is how do we all work together to connect the hinterland market to the world via the Port of Halifax versus other port. At CN, we do a lot of intermodal business, moving containers, domestic containers and overseas containers. It's roughly a $2 billion business for the company, so it's about 23% of our business. It's a very significant areas of growth for CN. It is very much part of our future to be successful in that business, so therefore we have a lot of self-interest in working very hard and very smartly with the stakeholders at the port and in order for our own needs on the business side. CN is blessed with long-standing customers here at Halifax, ZIM, ACL, the G6, Melfi, the O3 now. But really, I guess what's exciting is, we seem to be getting into a new era. And this new era of new call coming into Halifax and using Halifax as a pivot to enter more hinterland market. And I want to use these two first slides to try to give the people a sense of what we are trying to do at CN with our stakeholders, partners here in Halifax, is really targeting the hinterland. So that the Port of Halifax not only is the port of the Maritime Province, but the Port of Halifax become the Port of Toronto, the Port of Detroit, the Port of Illinois for Chicago, and even the Port of Indiana with Indianapolis. Because when you look at our track, we can actually create a product in conjunction with local labor, the port authorities, Halterm and Series, a product that can get this product in and out of these very large population area and very large manufacturing center. So really, when you look, for example, at the new G6 protocol, which is, we're extremely happy to see it coming back as an export call. If you're an exporters from Illinois or Michigan or Southern Ontario, Ohio, you should see that as one of your prime product for you to export back to Asia. And on that point, I'd like to really thank CMA and Lionel Châtelet and his team for working hard, and as well as Hapag-Lloyd, to help us create these new services so that we collectively have more ways to bring product, sell product to the U.S. Midwest, Southern Ontario and Ohio. So if you're an exporter, your choice before was to, using that service, was to send your product mostly by rail, come to the Midwest to Norfolk, where this was the last call before going back to Europe, and then sail out. Now that the last call is no longer Norfolk as a pivot, and Halifax is now the pivot, you can send your product to Halifax and actually quite reduce the transit time to final destination. You can catch the vessel closer to the North Atlantic before you cross the ocean and go to your market in Asia. The next one is also quite exciting. The interest here is that we seem to be reaching newer and newer market that were maybe underserved from Halifax. So we're talking places like Hong Kong, Vietnam, and other more southern location, where frankly, when you look at the sailing time for what started as a CMA vessel, now as an O3. O3 include China Shipping, UASC, and also Hamburg Süd could also buy capacity on that service. You can now come directly to North America, which is really for us the hinterland of Ontario and the U.S. Midwest, without having transshipment. So if you don't transship, that means you have a faster sailing time. Also, if you don't transship to a port of transmission, also you probably reduce variation into your transit time. So really our goal, collectively, and that's really one of the things that at CN we really work hard to create this environment. Our goal is that when these vessels come in Halifax, first port of call, without transshipment, directly from Suez, that when the container is offloaded in the dock, that we don't waste that precious transit time that they've given us. So we're first to North America, but if you're an importer into the U.S. Midwest, you want to hear that we're going to be first to the U.S. Midwest as well, because that vessel goes to New York after. So will an importer in Michigan, Illinois, or even Ontario use the Port of New York to dray their product to his hinterland, or will he use Halifax as a port to get the product to them in their hinterland? And really, from that point on, we start with a time advantage because we're first port of call, but we can't afford to lose that time advantage to get to the final city. So every days at the dock before we evacuate the dock counts a whole lot. And really, we're talking a race in days here, not in weeks, in days. So our objective collectively with our partners is to evacuate the dock from the time of discharge within 2 or 3 days on average. And if you're selling to the US Midwest, you probably would like to have your first train leaving the dock as a US Midwest train, because that's the most competitive area. That's also the place where you try to beat New York to the punch, because New York is also going to be trying to serve the US Midwest a couple of days later when the same vessel call in New York and discharge in New York. From a CN's point of view, and I think from a terminal operator point of view in Halifax, CN does not here to serve the terminal operator, and the terminal operator is not here to serve the CN. CN and the terminal operator are here to serve the shipping line. The shipping line is the customers, and the shipping line is also trying to serve the importers of this hinterland market. So ultimately, for a shipping line to be successful, what are they trying to sell to the importers in the hinterland? And this is where cost and service really are the two key features that the manufacturers who's bringing parts from Germany, or somebody who's bringing finished goods from Europe to put in a retail warehouse or retail store, is really looking at service and costs. And this is where collectively we create this product. The service and cost is not really created by the railroad or by the terminal operator or by the vessel itself. It's really the whole journey from beginning to end. What is CMA or HAPAC creating on the ocean? What are we creating as an experience at the port, at the dock? What is the experience we create all the way to the hinterland? And how does that combination of partnership effort compete with other choices, namely via New York with a US railroad to this market? So first and foremost on service, we would like to create a transit time in total that has obviously not fastest to Halifax, fastest to Chicago. In my experience before joining CN, I used to be a marketer of initial products, and distribution was extremely key to our success. And in those days, this is before CN was privatized, we had as a customer some time to walk in the shoes of the railroad to understand the railroad so the railroad could do a better job for us. The learning from that is now I'm in the railroad side. We need to remind ourselves the railroad is really a service provider, and we need to walk in the shoes of our customers to understand what they need. And when you try to convince an importers to use Halifax opposed to New York, you have to see it from their point of view. So they're looking at what is the fastest transit time from this origin to Chicago, or from this origin to Toronto, and how much variation there will be on this transit time. Will it be sometime plus or minus 2 days, or will it be sometime plus or minus 5 and 6 days? And where we get killed sometime in terms of reputation is when our transit time has too much variation, not so much because the train is slow, not so much because the vessel is slow, but because between the vessel and the railroad, the container would be at the port for too long. It would be left behind, or it'd be under a pile, or we haven't worked the weekend, such that the advantage we gain on the sea is lost on the land. And on the cost side, obviously, everybody's looking for the best cost possible. And the best cost may not be the lowest price. Obviously, price matter, and how the combination of all these price and processes, logistical processes, end up to having the cost. So one important point on the cost side, because we do have a disadvantage on the land, when you look at the map, there's obviously much more land mile from Halifax to Chicago and Toronto than there is from New York. New York is more inland in the continent. So we need to compensate that with a lot of efficiencies at the port and a lot of efficiencies on the rail. And the way to do that on the rail is like to do it in a shipping line. Very long train, double stack train. And the long train and the double stack train is actually loaded here in Halifax by the terminal operator. So our job is to give them enough train footage every day so they can evacuate the port with a 2 or 3 days dwell time. And their job in reciprocate for us is to give us a train which is double stacked and as long as possible. So when we leave town, we do have the economy of scale that would allow us to counteract the excess number of miles we have to get to markets like Toronto and Montreal. So this may not be obvious to the shipping line who's buying the service from us all, but for us to have the cost base to be able to compete with New York, which has less mile to the hinterland, we need to have a low cost. So we need big vessel, we need to have first port of call, we can't waste time at the dock, we need to load the train. Ideally, the first train to the Midwest is the first train, and that train is a long train, double stack train, so we get the economy of the CN network railroad. And then in that service, you need to be reliable, because being good some of the time and being fast some of the time is actually worse than being not so fast all the time, right? So when people manage their supply chain, they have set some target date as to which time they need the product at the beginning of the season, or the product to be on the shelf, or the product to come to the assembly line, the Fiat Chrysler. So they have some expectation of transit time, and being fast sometime and slow some other time really kills us, because our customers, ultimately the importers, can't quite live with that. So being reliable is quite important. And reliable means the railroad needs to be reliable, the terminal operator needs to be reliable, we count on shipping line to be reliable, and we need to be able to go to the winter, we need to be able to work the weekend, so the weekend is not a kind of a stop-and-go operation. And also our reputation from the labor side need to be as good as anybody else, so that the customers feel that as he's leaving the West Coast to move some traffic on the East Coast, that he's coming to a place like the experience today, which is good for them. So all in is, my analogy is like, this is a bit of like playing baseball. So on the import side, the picture is Halterman series. So they have the ball at the port, and they send it to us. So they send it to Keith's team, and Keith can catch balls in Toronto for Southern Ontario. He can catch ball in Detroit for Michigan and Ohio. He can catch ball in Chicago for Illinois. And he can catch ball in Indianapolis for Indiana. So these are the area where we can bring the product, and we depend on the terminal operator to load the train and get the train out and weekday and weekend, and there are pictures. When we do the reverse, when we do export business, and we're talking to an exporter, or the shipping line's talking to an exporter, to use us with Halifax as a pivot as opposed to use Norfolk, CN becomes the picture. So now we pitch the traffic to Halifax, and our job here is to make sure that we get the container in Halifax before sailing date. Most sailings is once a week, and you could bring the container to Halifax 2 days before the vessel leaves. That's great. If you bring it 3 days before the vessel leaves, it's not really added value because the vessel is only leaving in 3 days. But if you bring it 3 hours after the vessel left, you're actually 1 week late. So when you're in the export business, our role as pitchers, and Halterman series catching the ball, is to be on time, and on time being either you're there in time for sailing cutoff, or you're 1 week late to the next sailing. And that's really what I rate exporters a lot, is that in their case, it's not so much speed to the port, it's not missing the vessel cutoff, because that means now you're really, really, really late, us and them, to the promise they make to their own customer. So we're all in a big league, and the big league is Halifax, New York, Norfolk, Savannah, and on the West Coast, it's Vancouver, Rupert, LA, Long Beach, Seattle. And up to a point, the East Coast also compete with the West Coast. Customers who buy product from Southeast Asia could really, if they use the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal is not transshipment, it's direct shipment, you could probably get product to this hinterland as fast from the East Coast via Halifax, via Suez, than you could do on the West Coast. And a number of retailers and importers are doing some of that, and hopefully they'll keep doing a little bit more of that, so we can get the benefit of the fact that we can bring the product in the middle of the continent just as well as Vancouver or LA Long Beach. And it's really the team, it is one of the mindset at CN. We've signed memorandum of understanding with the port. We have level of service agreement with terminal operator, because we are an operator just like them. And we also have daily KPI to be sure that we do what we said, it was just said here, dwell time of 2 or 3 days all the time to most cities, and also that the port operator gives us a long train, a double stack train, so we can have the cost to be able to compete on price directly with New York. But in our league, really the Halifax port, which is really the Chicago, Toronto, Illinois port, is really made of labor, which is skilled labor, which we have in ample quantities, and we need that to be part of the team. The operator, the three of us, Halterm, Series, and CN, and the port authorities who need to be playing a sort of central role to put it together and help us having a vision as to where we're heading. Versus the New York team, the Yankees from New York, who would use, have a number of terminal operators and have two big railroads, the CSX and NS. And the CSX and NS can get you to Detroit, Toronto, and Chicago just like us. So it's really about, when you get to the interland market, it's really jump ball business. And it's really who has the best service, most reliable service, most cost-effective service, a service that the shipping line can go out and grow their own business. Then that attracts the volume over here. Capacity, there's many questions being asked from time to time about capacity. Capacity is really not the issue that we have. From time to time, we have people that come to see us at CN about building new port in Nova Scotia. We have all kinds of capacity. The railroad has all kinds of rail capacity. Today, we run one train a day each way. The reality, though, even though the reality of these trains are they longer and bigger than they were, so it's not so much about the number of trains, it's how many containers a day that we need to evacuate from the port to maintain that dwell time of 2 or 3 days. And our commitment is to bring enough train capacity, either through more train or longer train, or putting some capacity on a merchandise train so we can maintain that dwell time. But the rail corridor between Halifax to Montreal, Toronto, Detroit has actually an excess amount of capacity because I think, as we all know, the last 20 years, the amount of industries and manufacturing in the East have actually been reduced, partly with a strong Canadian dollar, for other reason. And that rail capacity that used to be provided for steel mill and paper mill is now freed up to do other things, namely, let's use it for import-export. Same thing with terminal capacity. The true terminal in town, they have, well-equipped, good labor base, and they have lots of capacity, so that's not an issue also. And same thing on the ship side. Now that we have more call coming in with the CMA 03 and the return of the G6 on export, there's all kinds of capacity available on the sea. So really, now that we have these calls, now that we have an increasing number of shipping line partners, how do we help them be successful in their model? So they've taken the risk to bring to Halifax more ship capacity. Therefore, how do we help them get more import business and more export business? And that more import business and more export business will not come from maritime, because I think the port has as much of that as it has already. It may not come from Quebec also. So how far do we need to go and get that business? We're back to be doing that in the interland. Just like this morning, it was described, Hamburg is doing that. So it's not a port of Hamburg, it's the port of a bigger catchment area. And for Halifax to be successful, to really grow and keep the shipping line who are bringing bigger ship, they want to have bigger discharge. And that bigger discharge can only be possible if you reach out to the interland, which in the case of the CN Railroad, the logical interland is Ontario, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois. That's where this thing will be, that's where we could be successful. Dwell time, a thing that we often explain, not always understood. What is port dwell time? It's from the time, whenever the ships arrive, maybe the ships arrive a little early, maybe it arrives a little late, but when it arrives and we start working the ship, it's the time between the container is offloaded from the ship to the time it will be leaving on the train. And those days in between those two are as relevant as slow steaming or fast steaming on the North Atlantic, or they are as relevant as how fast the train will go between Halifax to Toronto. So the dwell time is basically the number of hours, and we measure that every day. In fact, with the KPI agreement we have, the terminal operator, we have the dwell time by container. So every container there is today at the dock, we have the container number, we know which shipping line it came from, we know which city it's going, and we know how many hours it's been on the dock waiting to get on the train. And the objective here is to have a dwell time, a port dwell time better than the people that we compete with. And collectively, we compete mostly in these hinterland market with New York, first and foremost, and to a smaller extent on the import side, Norfolk and Savannah. If you're on the export side, you're probably competing more with Norfolk and New York. So is our dwell time better than these cities? And is reliability better than these cities? These choice is really ultimately what differentiates us from another pivotal point. Another thing, it was mentioned that, like in the case of Hamburg or other cities, including Halifax, What you do with a container here is also up to a point matter. Are we doing some added value services? Are we trying to always bring each container all the way to the hinterland, or are we going to de-stuff and re-stuff? And on those trains that come to Halifax, those trains are a combination of overseas business and domestic business. 53-foot container that comes to the Maritimes to bring what the Maritimes are consuming in the store. And because the Maritimes is more of a consuming area than a producing area, many of these containers go back to Toronto empty. In fact, in the case of CN, roughly the number is 8,500 containers every year leaves Halifax empty and go empty from Halifax to Toronto where they're needed for the next load to come back to the Maritimes. And these are just the containers that CN own. We have a number of partners who do business with us, you know, the armor, the trucking firm, the wholesaler, who also have their own private container that travels between Toronto and Halifax. And they too still have a number of empty containers that can't find a load in Halifax and go back to Toronto empty. So if you look at that from a supply chain point of view and how Halifax can help itself to be more competitive in New York, maybe there's a case here for if the product coming in 40-foot container is a lighter type product, that you can go from 3 40-foot container to 253-foot container, and Canadian Tire does some of that here in town. Then we create another cost and maybe a service advantage that we need to exploit more. And already in Halifax, you have a number of companies who do that in the warehouse, Armor and CFF. And you also have bonded areas, so maybe we could do that also for product that goes to the US Midwest in the hinterland and exploit the fact that we can maybe find a way to get the container back to the shipping line in Halifax and give them a port-to-port pricing whereby we use the economics of these bigger containers to go in the hinterland to fight this extra mile distance that we have. And it's an opportunity because there's an excess amount of 53-foot containers that are going back empty to Toronto and West. Just moving on, because Halifax has more than just a container business, even though that's kind of maybe on the industrial side the most obvious. You know, there's been quite a bit of discussion about investment the port has done with the break bulk business, or the dimensional business, the project cargo. And Patrick and his team is working very, you know, the port is making an investment. Patrick and the port team marketing is marketing that heavily. I think there's an opportunity to use that for, again, hinterland business. So I think the facilities is well known and understood for those who bring project cargo in the Maritimes and maybe all the way to the province of Quebec. But we should be able to sell that service also to the hinterland, way inland, because many of these project cargo go to New York, and from there they actually go quite a distance. And when you go quite a distance, you need to partner with the low-cost provider of land transportation, which is the railroad side. So more and more, we're working with the Port of Halifax, Karen's team and Patrick to actually do these joint marketing effort in Europe. I think we've had two such trips so far. I think when these conferences take place in Houston, we join in as well. And this is an example where if the railroads and the port and company like logistics join together and present themselves as one product, one solution, so that the people who are shipping these big project cargo to the hinterland will make potentially that choice more obvious and maybe easier to consider. So doing things together as a team that provides the product that the customer is trying to buy, you're back to trying to work in the shoes of your customer. He's bringing project cargo in Alberta, or somebody in Alberta wants to ship project cargo to Europe. Coming to them as kind of one solution makes a whole lot more sense than asking them to put the puzzle together on their own. Another things we do in Halifax, and we need to do more of, and maybe differently, is bringing finished vehicle. So across the bay here at Dartmouth, we have our Autoport, which is a port operation owned by CN, operated by CN. There's over 200 employees who work there, and it's basically as simple as getting vehicle off a ro-ro ship, putting it in a parking lot, sometime doing some work before preparation, and then after that, putting them on a rail car and shipping them inland. 100% of all the European vehicles sold in Canada comes via Halifax, via Dartmouth, and then they go in the hinterland. But more and more, as the Canadian dollar is changing, and as the European agreement hopefully will be signed soon, there is starting to be some product manufactured in Ontario and in Michigan that has been exported the other way. And that business today is done mostly by the Port of Baltimore. As well as also, as much as we can compete and bring a container to Chicago, we should be able to bring in a BMW or Mercedes to Chicago from Halifax. And these are two things that so far this operation seems to be more, I guess, historical reason is Canadian hinterland, but hasn't done the Midwest hinterland. And also this is an operation which is very focused on import, when in fact there starts to be some business which is export, and we need to capitalize on that. Same principle again is we're competing with existing supply chain, and we need to convince customers to look at this other choice, because this other choice could be, frankly, just as good, if not better. And in any of these things, as much as sometimes some of us have dismay of the fact that Canadian crude oil has come down, that hurt the Canadian economy, especially the West, that also brought down the Canadian dollar. And all of a sudden, within 18 months, there's a big shift in currency. So anything that has to do with port costs was in Canadian dollar, stays in Canadian dollar. But when you deal with people whose all the transaction is in US funds, a Canadian dollar purchase of $1 is not like when the dollar was at par. At 75 cents, we are becoming, in their spreadsheet, in the way they account for costs, much more affordable, because the Port of Baltimore is pricing in the US dollar, so is the Port of New York, so is the Port of Savannah and Norfolk, and all of a sudden we do have a cost advantage that we need to exploit more, even though we haven't really touched the price. The price in comparable dollar for the ultimate customers who's paying these port services is obviously a significant difference that we need to consider. I want to congratulate the port on their being a 2015 Port of the Year. How do you support and help the seafarer when they come in Halifax? And in closing, supply chain logistics is becoming really a sports team. And whether we do it cohesively or we do it sort of how things work out, we are a team playing with other teams. So it's the Halifax team, which in my view is the people who work at the Port Authority, and the three operators, CN, Halterm, and Series. If we create a team with one game plan, with similar KPI, with similar goal, we're much more likely to succeed versus other teams. Whether these other teams are New York, Norfolk, or Savannah, whether these other teams work cohesively or not, we are what we are, and we have the market in the Maritimes. We probably have the part of the market in Eastern Canada, but really the game to win ultimately makes the Port of Halifax even more relevant is the hinterland market. And to play in the hinterland market, we can only be successful as a team. So really, I think there's a quote from a football movie that really says, either we play together as a team and win as a team, or we may lose as individual, meaning CN or Series could be a great thing, but if we don't mesh, if we don't do this as opposed to doing this, then we're more likely to lose. If we do this and do it together, our chance of winning against other port, terminal operator, NSCSX, the odds goes up. And that's true for break bulk, it's true for imports, it's true for exports, it's probably true also for finished vehicle entering the country. So this is really, ultimately, CN is a service company. CN is not a railroad. Railroad is the main product. We have to create that service. And that service is not good enough on its own to win the day. That service really becomes really relevant to the other customers if we do it in conjunction with Series, Halterm, the vessel operator, and we see it the way that the ultimate pay of the bill, the importers or the Chryslers, is trying to buy the service.